All right, so now we're on to the economic boom, followed by the economic bust, and this will lead us into the Great Depression and various statistics related to the Great Depression and just how horrifyingly bad it was. And it all relates to deregulation or lack of regulation, this laissez-faire kind of option of running government of running business and governments, leading to eventually into FDR's New Deal, which had more regulation to help get us out of the Depression. All right, so this is Objective 9.01. And we're talking about the business cycles from the 1920s and 30s of boom and bust. So boom is when times are good, a bust is when times are bad. And the honest truth is, before the Great Depression, there had been panics and depressions before. And it was called a boom-bust economy. Things go great, then they go terrible. Then they go great, then they go terrible. Nowadays, with new regulations, things go good, and then they go not so good. Then they go good, then they go not so good. It basically offsets that boom and bust panic and bull market kind of stuff that was going on. All right, so let's talk about the return to normalcy, 1920. This is Harding. So this is the Republican Party. This is their campaign slogan. He wanted to basically return people to feeling secure, the way they felt before the war, and progressive reforms. So this was kind of coming after Woodrow Wilson, because we were brought in the war, and he got less and less popular as time went on, and all these new reforms are coming out that were somewhat slowing down the economy. And we're also talking about the slow beginnings into this sphere of, well, women just got the right to vote. Things are changing a lot. And it's kind of a return to normalcy. It was kind of a, let's go back a little bit. Let's take a step back from this progressive policy because this is getting a little too scary. All right, and then the Teapot Dome scandal happens. It involves the Harding administration and a guy named Albert Fall. He was the Secretary of the Interior. Basically, Albert Fall was leasing government land to private companies for oil rights, and he was getting illegal kickbacks. So he's basically getting paid by these companies to let them lease the land cheap, which is very, very, very illegal. And this all in Wyoming. There's a Teapot Dome. That's why it's called that, because it's the area where the oil wells are. And here's a quick cartoon about the oil well scandal. And this is Albert Fall. And he was the corrupt Secretary of Interior, and he was under Harding's administration, but he was basically the guy that said, yeah, I'm going to try to make some money out of my position as Secretary of the Interior. So his job is like protect national lands, and he chose to lease them out to whoever would pay him the most money, which was not very patriotic. All right, the economy and major industry causes of the Great Depression. So we're going to have to lead into, first of all, there's a lot. The Great Depression, there's no single event. There's no single factor. It is a long, involved process, and a lot of things led to it, but you can really kind of source a lot of them down to deregulation. There was a lot of foreign influence going on. Hitler was starting to take over in Germany, in Europe. They were experiencing depression out there. There's so much going on that you can't just say, oh, it's this, oh, it's that, just because that just won't work out. All right, so pause here, take a look and read it. If there's anything you don't understand, come talk to me about it, and we'll figure out what's going on. But for the most part, just know that a lot of deregulation led to negative political effects. Foreign affairs were going on at the time. Again, this kind of just shows you all these various things happening at the same time that just kind of led to this perfect storm of, oh, things are about to get really bad. All right, so first, the concentration of wealth issue. So a very small percentage of the population controlled a huge portion of the wealth. Think of like the captains of industry, J.P. Morgan, all those guys. They still had a whole lot of wealth and power in this time, so they had most of it. More than 70% of the nation's families earned less than $2,500 per year. That was what was considered the minimum amount needed to start a decent standard of living. Families could not afford many of the household products that manufacturers even produced. You can't click on the chart, so don't worry about it. The farm sector. All right, so we are a very large country. We have a lot of grassland, fertile soil. Farming is everywhere. It's hard to find a state where farms don't exist, especially when you're talking about anything east of the Mississippi River and some places west, like you got Nebraska and other places in the Midwest with just tons of farmland, Idaho, everything, timber farming, whatever you got. Farming income was huge. Now, World War I, you had huge demand for crops because there was a war going on in Europe and you could export the goods. After World War I ended, there was peace, and they could start farming again. So guess what happens? The demand for goods drops. When demand drops, prices drop. When prices drop, your profit margin drops, or in many cases goes away completely, and you're basically just having surpluses you can't do anything with. A surplus being more goods than you can use. So you have overproduction happening. All these farmers got used to, during World War I, being able to make as much as being able to farm as much as possible and selling it all at a good price. Well, now they have all this equipment, they bought all this stuff, and they have no place to sell their product because there's no market for it. They just don't need it anymore. Mechanization. So on top of not having a market that wants the stuff you got to sell, you just bought a bunch of new fancy equipment to make the farming more efficient. Well, most farmers went into debt buying that equipment, thinking it would get paid off, just like when the times were good during World War I, because I was selling all my crops. Well, now we're not selling as much. I owe the bank a bunch of money on all this new fancy equipment, and I can't pay off my mortgage on all that equipment. So you got to deal with the loss of property, the loss of farms, to this high level of debt related to these business purchases. Next, the laissez-faire economics term. This policy basically means hands-off government. Remember back to our whole conversation about the captains of industry / robber barons. They benefited and were able to make a lot of money because of the laissez-faire marketplace. Basically, the free market will decide what's best. So when you let people kind of just do whatever they want, they do what's in their best interest, which is about their money. It's not necessarily about keeping everybody happy. It's about keeping their shareholders in their business happy. Now, Congress proposed a bill to help failing farms, but President Coolidge vetoed the bill, stating farmers have never made money. I don't believe we can do much about it. That's an actual quote, based on saying that farmers don't make money, so we're not going to help them out anyway. Most ridiculous is a ridiculous statement. Now, Calvin Coolidge became president because Harding died of a sudden heart attack. So this guy was vice president, and this is still during a time period when VPs didn't have much power. They didn't do anything until the president, God forbid, died. So this guy was never planning on having power. So that statement makes perfect sense for somebody who might not have been prepared for the job. So Coolidge was a pro-business kind of guy. That's why he was like, podunk farmers, who gives a crap about them? He was more worried about people like the I'm going to say the Rockefellers, all those guys, the big wigs, the people who had tons of money. He wanted to help them because, they're the ones that make the economy better because they have all the money. So if they benefit, it makes me look good. And here's a quote from Coolidge. The man who builds a factory builds a temple. The man who works there worships there. Basically saying big business is the best business, is how he kind of looked at things. Some more factors. Easy credit. So banks were not strict about how they lent out money because money was being made so easily on the stock market. It was a sure thing. If you invested in stocks, things are going to go good for you. You're going to make some money. Anybody who had some disposable income could suddenly make some money. Very similar to how it was in the early and mid-90s up until the late 90s. And often they lend out money to borrow just to buy stocks. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. And a lot of people borrow beyond their means. So an installment plan. This is not layaway. We think about layaway nowadays. A layaway is where you buy something and you say, hey, here's $20. I'm going to keep making payments on it. And when I'm done, I'm going to take the item from you. Installment plans are when, hey, I'm going to buy this bed, take it home, give you $100 for it, and pay that $100 over a period every month for a year until the bed's paid off. That's an installment plan. Now, the problem with this is it's a lot easier to buy something you can't afford when it only costs you $100 up front. And people just kept doing this over and over and over again until they were basically over-leveraged. They owed too much. And there would be interest on all these things. There would be interest on every payment they made. So these people were slowly starting to live beyond their means and going into debt for basically household crap. Like, this is a good cartoon. Come see my new washer, Miss, I guess that's Cohen. Oh, did you get one too? Well, yeah, because everybody was able to buy on credit or buy on installments, which was essentially a form of credit. And you had this terrible situation where people were starting to owe more than they owned, which is never a good situation. And then you got speculation. High-risk investments in the stock market. Now, high risk doesn't mean evil or bad. High risk just means you might lose all your money. Investors would pay several times more than the actual value of the stock. President Hoover's response to the stock market crash in 1929, basically he's talking about speculation here. All right, buying on margin. You can't talk about the stock market crash without referring to marginal purchases. Here's what happened. I have $10. The stock costs $100. I would pay $10 and then borrow the rest of the money to pay for the stock. Now that doesn't sound too crazy. And the idea was the stock would go up in price, I'd sell it and make money even after I paid off the loan. So you're hoping that basically the stock goes up in price before the loan money is due. That way you make money on everything you purchase. Now that works out fine unless the stock goes down. And if it goes down too much and you have too much stock invested on margin, you can't pay off the loans, which means you're damaged at the bank and you lose all your money and you go bankrupt. Now here's where it gets really goofy. Because you buy on margin, you own the stock. And what people would start doing is using the stock they purchased on margin as collateral on other loans to buy more stock on margin. So it was this giant house of cards where everything was built up like a reverse pyramid. I'm going to take out this one marginal loan and use that to justify taking out more marginal loans. And if the stock starts going down, that's a crash. It's going to happen because you can't pay off all those loans, especially when they're purchased on margin, because this thing you used as collateral, the thing you put up to make sure that the bank got their money back, was becoming worthless, the stock paper essentially. And here's the thing. Buying on margin was advertised like this amazing new miracle way to invest because, hey, you can invest a little bit of money and then make a lot. It's a way to invest $10 and you make $10. And you do that 1,000 times, you're going to be a rich man. That's how they advertise it. Very kind of terrifying nowadays when you think about it. And then comes Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. So 10/29/29. The stock market starts to crash. And remember, these stocks are bought on margin, and the value of them is going way below the value of the loan. So if I got loaned $100 to buy a stock, and now it's worth $50, and I sell it, I'm $50 short. That loan's not getting paid off. When loans don't get paid off, the economy suffers, especially when this is happening millions of times over. And there's a chart of Black Tuesday. You just see it just goes down right towards the end of October. Bam. All right, the Hawley-Smoot tariff, not terrier, gosh, late at night. The Hawley-Smoot tariff. It was a very high tariff, and a tariff is just a tax on imports to protect American industry. So if you don't want Japan to be able to compete with our auto industry, you put a 50% tariff on all imported Japanese goods. That protects places like Ford and GM who don't have to compete as hard. Now the problem with this is all tariffs hurt trade, which is okay if times are really, really good. If everybody's making money and has a lot of savings, a tariff's not going to do anything bad. But if everybody's starting to lose their money rapidly, a tariff is going to destroy the economy even faster because now you can't sell anything. You can't buy anything. It hurts your ability to export and import because when you put up a tariff, guess what? They're going to put a tariff up against you. And it just creates a stoppage in trade. And if you learn this in civics, trade is this universal benefit. Like every time they bring up trade is always to the benefit of mankind because it gets people what they want at the price they want. It gives them more options. The more options consumers have, the more they buy. The more they buy, the better the economy gets. But if you start putting up tariffs, it stifles and stops trade, which damages the economy. And like I said, if things are going great and there's a lot in savings and the value's high, it's okay. But when things are going bad and things are going down rapidly, it can make bad things even worse. All right, key economic indicators. All right, so if you want to ever be scared about when finance, like the world's in kind of a troubled spot, keep an eye out for banks and what they're doing. If they're failing, that's your sign things are about to get bad. When businesses have to close down, especially large businesses that have existed for a long time. So Wachovia was a big bank. They got bought out by Wells Fargo. When that stuff starts to happen, that should be red flags to everybody. When businesses close down, if you see like God forbid, if Ford Motor Company were to close down tomorrow, people would panic because they'd be like, what is going on? What's about to happen? Do I need to get my money out of stocks and move it somewhere else? Like, they wouldn't know what to do. And then this all tends to lead to unemployment rises, which means people can't buy things, which leads to companies not making money, which leads to more layoffs, higher unemployment, people not buying things. And it becomes this nasty cycle of just things getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on. So take a look at these few charts. You got bank failures, business failures, unemployment. You notice they tend to go along with each other, with the exception of business failures. But that had more to do with, one, there were fewer businesses to fail, and also due to some government regulation that started coming through. Bank failures spiked in 1934, then dropped down again. Most of that's due to regulation. And for right now, we'll go ahead and stop. And the next thing we'll be talking about is how we're going to deal with the time during the Great Depression. So we've talked about how it started, and now we're going to talk about the Depression as it existed.